Today we're going to talk about marketing, specifically multi-channel marketing and the art of the product launch. So I'm going to just start by telling you a little bit about who I am, and then we'll go through my playbook. So this is a playbook that I learned basically over the past 10 plus years. So I'm the CMO of Sprig. I've been with Sprig for about 5 months, but before that I spent 10 years helping grow Yext, if you guys are familiar with Yext. I started when we were about 75 people, 10 million in revenue, and then grew it through the IPO and then 5 years after. So I have had every role in marketing. I've seen every stage of a company's growth, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what I have learned along the way. So we're going to start with a story here. This is a story about how if you build it, they won't come. I think we all know this inherently through our experiences that we've seen. But I'm going to tell you a story. So my brother-in-law he's a software engineer. He had a little startup with his buddy. And all along as they were building the product, they spent months doing this. They were talking to some investors, all this stuff. And I was asking them, well, how are you planning to launch this? What are your plans for getting early customers? What are you going to do here? And he's like, oh, I got it. I have a plan. And finally, right before the launch, he told me what his plan was. And it was to post it on Hacker News. And it will go to the top. And then he'll get all of the leads he needs to close the business that he needs. So what do you think happened? He posted on Hacker News and nothing. Amazing product. Didn't totally take off. Don't worry about him. He's now a PM at Google. He's doing just fine. But the lesson to me here, and I think for everybody, is if you build it, they will come does not work. It really is how do you go find the right people? How do you get that message out there and start those conversations to get them to understand your product and then buy your product. So we're going to go through 6 different things that I have learned along the way. And at the end, we'll do a little case study, how you can combine them and how you can maybe make this work for you. I'm going to combine some B2B SaaS examples with some pop culture examples. So we'll jump right in. The first thing that everyone should be aware of, if you're in marketing, if you're not, you should be aware of the paid, owned, and earned media model. I'll go to the next slide here and show you what that is. This is where every single thing that you do in marketing fits into one of these buckets. So I'll show you some examples. In the owned bucket, this is things like your website, your blog. It's the things that you have ownership over, and you have control over how much you want to build it out or create. It doesn't mean anybody sees it, though, right? You can put up your website. You can do 1 million blog posts. They're not SEO optimized. Nobody sees them. So owned is really powerful if you can figure out a way to distribute it, but that has to be part of it. One way you can distribute it is through paid. I think this is very obvious, right? You can pay to get people to see your ads or your content, or maybe sponsor a conference, and you can pay to meet people. My recommendation there is to combine the owned with the paid. The last bucket, though, is my favorite one, and that's earned. So that's where you have basically borrowed someone else's audience, and you're not exchanging any money for it. So that's things like PR. That can be co-marketing and partnerships. This, to me, is really the biggest area of amplification of what you do, but it can be the hardest one to get done. Ultimately, though, you want to figure out how to combine, like, what is your media mix between paid, owned, and earned that's going to get you the distribution that you need. And you probably want to experiment with lots of different things here to understand what's going to resonate with your audience, and that's also going to change over time as your company grows. But ultimately, if you're thinking about a marketing plan, I would bucket out the different tactics in each of these categories and think about what your mix should be. The next one is to leverage the relationships that you have. So my brother-in-law could have asked one of his buddies to share it on LinkedIn and amplify the relationships that he already had. You should think about that. When you launch a company, when you have a product, the people who you know personally are going to be your biggest cheerleaders from day one. That can also mean, let's say you have an established company, you're launching a product, that could be your customers who you already have. How do you get them, who are already advocates for you, to sort of share and advocate on your behalf? But a third approach here is to actually bring in influencers in the industry who you can make a sort of a vested part of your company. That can mean you make them an advisor and give them shares and things like that. Or sometimes just asking people to participate can go a long way. So if you don't have the relationships, you should think about how to build them. And I'm going to give a specific example of what we did at a company called Stamped. So right before Yext, I was at a small company called Stamped in 2012. It was a consumer iPhone app. And we had Justin Bieber as a user and an investor. Yep. So this was like at the early days of celebrity investing in 2012. But his manager, Scooter Braun, was also an investor. And so we went to them, and we had a new product that was coming out, and we asked if we could film a launch video. So we flew out to LA to film this video, highlight of my life, interviewing Justin Bieber. And so we put together this video that sort of brought the product to life, and then he shared it on his social. And you should have seen the traffic spike. You can imagine it was huge. So that's an example of not everyone knows Justin Bieber. You don't have that personal relationship. But how do you go find the people who can be influencers for you and bring them into the fold in your company? That doesn't need to necessarily be someone with 1 million Instagram followers. That might not be right for your audience. But figure out who are those people who you can bring in and help. They can help give feedback on the product. They can give you direction on strategy, but they can also help with your marketing. So Justin Bieber or another influencer in the industry. Third tip, anchor your marketing. So this sort of goes back to that paid, owned, earned approach here, where when you have your own marketing, your own message that you want to get out into the world, you can sort of shout in the world and nobody sees it. Instead, what I recommend always is that you leverage someone else's moment. So that can mean, for example, I'm just going to go to an example here of, let's see, this will go forward. Yes. An example of, let's say Samsung at CES. I think this is a really good example. So Samsung does its giant activation, right, at CES, but they intentionally choose that because there's already so many people who are going to be there. All of the journalists are already there. They are going to get into the news cycle, and they're sort of slotting themselves into an already established moment in tech. They are leveraging someone else's audience to anchor their own message. There's lots of different ways that you can do this. When you think about sort of PR, we think a lot about tentpoles and editorial calendars. And so how do you time an announcement, a product launch, whatever it is, with something else that's going on? This is where you can think about that media mix. Maybe you sponsor a conference where you can speak on stage to announce your new product or a beta of your product so you can get people to participate. That's a really interesting way to combine the different paid, owned, and earned. But it is really helpful if you can go to a place and a time where people that are influencers in your industry, that are your buyers, that are press, whatever it is, where they're already going to be, and you can fit into that narrative because it makes it a lot easier to break through the noise and to get more sort of bang for your buck and make sure that people see it. So you should definitely think about how you can anchor your message, whether that's a time of the year or potentially an event. I'm a big believer in doing things at events. And you can leverage their audience. So anchor your marketing. Number 3, 1 + 1 = 3. I know I'm in marketing, but I do know how to do math. This here is the idea that when you combine a whole bunch of things together in a sort of contained period of time, it's going to have a bigger impact. So we're going to go to another pop star for some inspiration here, Taylor Swift. So you guys might remember last fall, she relaunched her Red album. You remember this? She actually, I felt, took over the airwaves for a week. 1 week, though. It was a really contained period of time where she did a dozen different things. And these are just some examples. So she had a little mini documentary for that 10-minute song. She was on SNL. She had some partnership with Starbucks. She did late nights shows, and she had merch on her own site. So this is an example where I didn't count the number of things she did. It's hard for me to say exactly how many things she did, but it was a handful of things in a week, and it felt like she sort of took over all the noise for that week. So my recommendation here is to think about how can you not just put out, again, if you have a product launch, how do you not just put out a blog post that maybe you share on social, maybe you pay to boost whatever it is, but that you can actually have a sort of sequence of activities that together are actually going to make the industry notice you more than if you just did one or if you spread it out over a number of weeks. So 1 + 1 = 3. This is the idea that you condense a lot of different things into one time period so you can have a bigger impact. I think this is, you think about this, it all sort of fits together where you think about anchoring your marketing. You can anchor it with one moment in time. Maybe it's a conference that you want to sponsor, get on stage, have the announcement, and then you can do a whole bunch of other things around the conference. Maybe that night you do a dinner where you have VIP people come. Maybe you have a press announcement that you time to be right after that announcement about the product to help to continue the story. Maybe you have some sponsored, like you do some paid, you sponsor a newsletter or two or something like that can help sort of create the surround sound feeling. All right, next one, have a constant drumbeat. So I just said you want to condense all of your activities into a short period of time, but you also want to constantly have things to share. So you have your announcement, you have your product launch, you want to continue to have activities that are going to go on afterwards. So I'm going to share something that we used at Yext. I call it the swim lanes slide. This is where you have all of your different activities that you could possibly have on one side, and then you map it out over a period of time. So you can see how over time different things are going to happen and how they relate to each other. So this is literally something that we used a couple years ago. You can map out when you have internal activations. So you see we had sales kickoff on there. We weren't going to do a lot that week. You can see when we're going to have emails go out, paid media, webinar, direct mail. Pre-COVID was so good. All of that. So you can see how it all kind of fits together, and you can sequence it over time. Our CFO at Yext is like a legend in SaaS. He took Salesforce public. He took Pandora public. He took Yext public. And his thing with investors was that you need a new press release every 2 weeks. You need to constantly have that drumbeat of things to share. So I'll leave you with that from the investor side. But it's the same in marketing. You want to have a fresh reason to reach out because different messages are going to resonate in different ways with different audiences. So that can mean if you are like we get tired of what we're doing before our prospects do, before our customers do. So try to think about how you can repackage it or reframe it or chop it up in different ways so you can share it over a period of time. One of the things I really like to think about is like using all parts of the whale, if you will, where maybe you have, again, a product launch, where there's some industry trend that you're tying into that you want to have the comms around. Maybe what you do is you have that talk track. You announce it, then you do a webinar on it. Then you chop it up and do 10 different blog posts on it. And then you share those blog posts on social, and you create social images so you can share it over a period of time. You don't actually need to do all that much original work right there. Like the origin of all of that content came from that one product launch and that one sort of the story around how it fits into the industry trend. But then you can use it lots of different ways and then distribute it over a period of time. And there's lots of different tools to distribute it. So when you think about, I think that the bar on the side is really important on what your sort of internal and external distribution channels are. Again, that goes to the paid, owned, and earned. So I would suggest you do an exercise of what are those channels for you. There's some really obvious ones around email, paid media. You can think about webinars, which isn't really a channel as much as an activity. Events are, I think, extremely powerful. So I would suggest that being a line item for you. But think about, obviously, your BDRs. They're critical here, and sales reps. And just general team. So how do you get the team as your company is your biggest source of influencers? How do you get them to share some of this news and actually tell them to do it and make them do it and make it easy, but coordinate it all. Because if you can give the team a new reason to reach out to prospects every 2 weeks, using a lot of the same sort of content that you already have, just repackaged, you can go a really long way with a fairly small investment. But that cadence is really important to making people feel like you have a lot of new stuff coming. All right, here's the last one. Announce it multiple times. So as I said, I think we get bored of things before our prospects do, before the industry does. People do not pay attention. You have to say things multiple times, and don't be afraid of it. I do suggest you change it ever so slightly in how you approach it. So let me give you a Sprig example here. This is something we did this summer. We had a beta launch that we announced in a paid sponsorship at an industry conference. At that conference, we asked for people to participate in our beta. We got tons of interest. They gave us feedback on our product, which is great, but we also had some meaningful sales conversations come from that. Then, a couple months later, when the product was ready, we had a GA announcement. We had a TechCrunch article, timed with funding, all of this. And so it allowed us to share this news multiple times, but make it kind of continue to feel fresh and have an impact. So if you missed it the first time, you heard it the second time. We'll also continue now. This was just a month ago that we did this launch. We will now continue to share customer stories as we have Lighthouse customers that we want to share. We have lots more content planned. So you kind of create that editorial calendar, that curriculum that's in line with all of this, and you continue to have that drumbeat where really every 2 weeks, we are aiming to get something new out, and maybe even more frequently in the high seasons, which is kind of like right now. So don't be afraid to announce things multiple times. I think if we're all paying really close attention, you would probably notice that even the biggest companies do this, where maybe they, like, let's say Salesforce has the Dreamforce, they announce all sorts of stuff. They say, next year we're going to be launching this. Next year comes, is it ready? I don't know. And so maybe it's ready, maybe it's not. But if it's not, they're going to repackage it and say, it's coming soon. And they're going to do it multiple times. And that's OK. Particularly even if it has launched, if you have new enhancements, you have new things that you've added to it, you can say it's a 2.0, and you can sort of repackage it again. Don't feel like you need to constantly have new. I think it's really more about how many times you say it and how you get it to stick in your prospects' heads. So say it. Don't be afraid to say it multiple times. My tip here is to do a beta launch and a general availability launch. I think it's really powerful because you do get to share something multiple times. I think sometimes as the company, you are so proud of the product and you kind of want to keep it a secret, and then you have this big moment, like, again, my brother-in-law in Hacker News, where you're telling the world, but the world doesn't always hear. There's a lot of stuff going on. So in order to break through the clutter, you should think about sharing it multiple times. All right, we're going to go to an example here. This is like totally random. I just sort of made up an example of what a company could be. So fintech selling to mortgage agents. I like this because when you can do vertical marketing, you can speak really clearly to your target audience in the language that they care about, and you can actually have a bigger impact than just sort of the broader, if you're selling to just tech companies. That can be harder. It's actually a lot easier when you have the vertical and you have a really clear ICP persona that you're selling to. So we can go through this here. Totally made up, but I think it could work. OK, so this idea here is, let's say you have a new product that you're launching, and you want to do a beta launch. You can do a sponsorship of Digital Mortgage, which is National Mortgage News Conference. It's a super niche trade conference, probably not very expensive because it's niche, but your target audience will be there. The people who are going to care the most are going to be there. So pay to get on stage speaking. Because it's sponsored, because it's thrown by National Mortgage News, you can go and build relationships with reporters, and you can get some earned press potentially for this. They want to tell the world that people are going to their conference and it's a place to be. So they are incentivized to help sort of amplify what you're doing on stage. Try something like maybe you give 20 slots for beta customers. You could probably have unlimited, but creating that scarcity is going to help drive adoption. So maybe you say the first 20 people are going to get access to this early, and people love that stuff. They kind of go crazy for it. So creating scarcity is really powerful here. But you also want to make sure that in your beta you have what I would call a lighthouse customer. So you have someone who maybe is already using your product, but you want them to try this new one with a really strong brand, because then when you do your second launch here, you can say, well, this brand is already using it, and that's going to add a lot of credibility to what you're doing. Plus, as you have these beta customers, you can think about how to incorporate them into the larger launch, and they can kind of become influencers for you. So again, this is sort of like, how do you leverage your relationships? How do you bring these people in? Let them give feedback on your product. People who feel ownership are more likely to help you, and you can build that relationship. The next thing you might do in between the two launches is maybe there's a content report. Maybe your product, you should actually always try to have your product tie into some industry trend or something that's going on that you can be authoritative about. So maybe there's a way for you to collect data that's proprietary about why your product is critical to solve this need. Just a Yext example, we launched local listings product for healthcare. So it was about like making sure that the address was correct of ERs, for example. So when we launched this, we said there's a crisis in healthcare. This is life or death, because if people can't get to the ER in an emergency, it really is life or death. And it struck a chord. So try to think about how you can tie it into something that is that they already care about and is a trend in the industry. In this content report, maybe try to pull in, maybe it's the lighthouse customer, maybe it's an influencer that you brought on as an advisor. Try to pull them in to write some content with you, potentially, and then help amplify it. So that's going to, again, lend credibility, but also give you more of an audience. It's kind of that earned audience. You could pay an influencer to do that, by the way. That's something that often they're pretty open to because they're looking to monetize whatever it is that they're doing. So it depends on who the influencer is, but maybe look for that sort of impartial third-party group in the industry who is influential. You're going to want to obviously promote the report on your own channels, but think about how to promote it on paid as well. That can be paid social, and then you can retarget people to get down to a demo. So like hook them with the content, and then try to nurture them so they will actually talk to you. And then follow it with a webinar. So anytime you have a piece of content, do a webinar. You've done all the work, done all the work already. So just use it again. Use all parts of the whale and do a webinar. Then that'll get you to your GA launch. So this is where, when you have that launch, publish the customer story with that lighthouse customer. In the press release or whatever announcement blog that you do, reference the customer. Try to get press coverage. It's increasingly hard to get earned press coverage, but as we discussed, you already have this relationship with National Mortgage News, so maybe they're more willing to publish that earned content. Otherwise, pay for it. Nobody really knows the difference. So I highly recommend that you do that. Try a launch event. That might sound a little like overwhelming, and in a post-COVID world, do people go to events? I think we can see today that people are back going to events, and there's a big appetite for it. So a launch event could be a cocktail party. It could be a VIP dinner. It doesn't have to be a giant produced, half-day track event. It can be something where you just get people together, but it just creates more noise, and it also helps you build relationships. And in B2B, I mean, we are selling to people, right? And so it's really important that you build those relationships, and it's just a moment, it's a reason to bring people together. And then obviously you have your own channels here. So you have social, email, blog, website, update all that, get that where it should be for your GA launch. Then you want to have your drumbeat that you're doing afterwards. So think about direct mail. I said that I love direct mail. I do, but particularly when you can send things of value. So again, I'll give you a Yext example. We had a partnership with Amazon Alexa, and we sent those dots to everybody. I mean, we sent thousands of these dots out. And every time we did it, we'd spend, I don't know, let's say like $5,000 on the dots. We'd generate like $1 million in pipeline. It was nuts how much it worked. And I just wish people were going to the office so I could send them direct mail. It's a little bit harder now, but think you can experiment with what that might look like. You can do a webinar again with National Mortgage News. Do something afterwards. You can pay them to do this. They'll often do lead guarantees. So you can say, you have to drive 200 people to this. And you can look at the cost per lead and see if that makes sense for you. But it's a I think undervalued or underused thing. Content syndication is a similar concept where you can pay. You have your content report. You can pay to have that get sent out. And again, you'll have your lead guarantee. And then do a series of field dinners or cocktail parties. These dinners are not that hard to go do. They're not that expensive to go do. But go to your prospects. Go in market and build those relationships. You would be surprised at how effective they are. At Sprig, we are our ICP is a user researcher, and I think they don't often get invited to dinners. So at that launch I mentioned we did earlier this summer, we invited, a bunch of VIPs to a dinner, and someone literally said, "This is the nicest dinner I've ever been to." So, made me feel good. But people want to go to the stuff. They want to, especially now, connect and build relationships with each other and network. So leverage that to your advantage. So this is an example of something that you might do over 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. I think this is something that you can really extend out over a period of time. This is just a pretty simplified version of all of the things that you can do, but it combines all of the 6 things we talked about. So we'll give you the recap slide here. The first thing, I talked about this a lot, get really familiar with the pay-to-earn model. Figure out what you want to invest in, what's going to make sense for your company, for your audience. You're not going to be able to do all of them well, and don't try to do all of them well. You can't. Focus on a couple that are going to be really effective for you, and then invest in those and scale those up, and then maybe move on to the next one and experiment with it. But make sure that you are thinking about having a mix of all three. Leverage your relationships or build relationships. So make sure you're pulling in everyone that you already know, but then get somebody who's influential in your industry to help amplify what you're doing or give you feedback on the product. Anytime you bring somebody in, they feel more connected and they're bought in and they're more likely to help you. Those relationships, by the way, that you build early in your company's growth or product's growth can pay off for years. Even after potentially your paid engagement, whatever it is over, you'll find that they'll sort of stick with you, particularly if you're changing the industry. Anchor your marketing. So choose a moment in the editorial calendar, choose a conference. I highly recommend conferences for this, particularly if you can go really niche and it's the conference in the season for your industry. Anchor your marketing around that. That can be a launch, that can be an announcement, whatever it is. In fact, if you do sponsor a conference, I think you shouldn't even go unless you have some anchor to it, because otherwise you're just another booth. Create some compelling reason for people to want to talk to you. 1 + 1 = 3, just think of Taylor Swift. This is where, again, you combine the different activities for a period of time to have a bigger impact. And then number 5 is you have your constant drumbeat. So you sustain it afterwards over a period of time. And you want to have all of your distribution channels, your assets, your resources coordinated in that way. So that swim lane slide, my team is so tired of me showing because I use it every day. I show it to somebody. It is so helpful as you plan out your activities and communicate what's coming, because that's actually, I think, sometimes the hardest part in marketing, right? And then don't be afraid to announce it multiple times. That can mean that it's the one product launch and you have multiple phases of it. That can mean that you announce a 1.0 this year, a 2.0 next year, whatever it is. People are not paying as much attention as we are. I wish they were. But don't be afraid to announce it multiple times, because it's going to take a few times to really to get into people's heads. If you can combine all of these, your next product launch will be a multi-channel success. Even if you can just do a couple of these, you'll be surprised at how efficient and effective your programs will be, and you'll get that return on investment.